This is a mind map I made the other day. It covers the chapters of 3 entire topics. All it took was 30 minutes to make, and because of it, I will remember what I learned forever. My name is Zain Asif. I am now a 4th year medical student, and over the last 6+ years, I have been gradually, consistently working and getting good at learning how to learn how to absorb information effectively and efficiently. And that is why I can confidently say that mind mapping is the single most beneficial technique that I've learned over this entire year, because it's helped me process and remember huge amounts of information in such an effective way. And that is what I want to teach you today. By the way, I've made an absolutely free, detailed mind map PDF guide for you guys to complement this video as well. It is completely free. All you have to do is click the link in my description below and I will send you a PDF directly that includes the entire mind map method, extra details to each step, annotated mind maps of my own, and answers to every one of your questions that you guys have asked in the comments and the community posts. Again, linked in the description below. Enter your email and you will get the full PDF. The way I've learned to build these mind maps is using the PRO mind mapping method. PRO, priming, relating, and organizing. And I'm going to go through every single step within each of these phases using a mind map that I made a few days ago. But before I lose half the low attention spanners watching, I'm going to quickly go through some frequently asked questions that I get about creating mind maps in general. Number 1, why am I creating mind maps? First things first, we need to understand the reason we're creating these mind maps instead of just jumping and reading through our books. The fastest way to learn is to first create a base of one or multiple related topics. This base should link all the key concepts and processes within these topics on one page. And the best way to do that is using these mind maps. So that when you're revising the rest of the chapter afterwards, you will be able to link everything that you're reading there to these initial mind maps. Because even though most of you don't know this, the way you learn things is by making links from this new knowledge that you're learning to pre-existing knowledge or experiences or other things to do with this topic. And that is what this mind map can act as. Number 2, what information goes on these mind maps? Remember, this is just the basic structure of the topics. So obviously you only put down the basic to medium level information on these mind maps. No nitty-gritty details, no difficult concepts that you won't understand, because that's a waste. Number 3, how much information goes on these mind maps? The amount of topics and chapters you include in one mind map depends on the information you're learning and the exam that you're giving. My exams test me on the clinical side of hundreds of diseases. It makes way more sense for me to do multiple related diseases and put them on the same mind map because they all link to the same topic, right? That's way more sensible than putting just a singular disease on there. But basically it depends on what you're doing. You have to be the judge. Now let's get started with the exact steps. I'm gonna break and simplify everything down as much as possible, so try and follow along. Phase 1, the priming stage. Open up all of the lectures and chapters to do with those 3 related topics that you've selected, and let's get started. This is the preparation part of creating your mind map. Priming is essential for not just this, but for any learning. It's basically you setting the stage for any revision that you're gonna do. Step 1. Figure out what your 3 related topics are about. For me, I figure out what each disease is and how it generally affects our body. It's a very simple step. You don't need to spend more than a few minutes on it. But you see, straight away, I'm thinking of these diseases together. I'm reading their definitions one after the other with the goal of comparing them. How are they different or similar from one another? It's much more useful than learning each of them in isolation. Step 2. Understand A, the structure of the chapter, and B, the basics of the chapter. Now you try and skim read all of the chapters of these topics together. While reading through multiple ones, think about how each individual chapter is laid out. What is its structure? What are the sections of these chapters divided up into? And then compare between the chapters again. How do these sections of chapter 1 and chapter 3 compare? Is a certain section of chapter 1 heavier compared to chapter 3? Why? Why is there more emphasis on this bit than it is for that disease? This is you just creating a big picture for all of the topics and comparing them along the way. As for understanding the basic information, go through each of the chapters top to bottom multiple times if needed. But the rule is you are only focusing on the basics. You're not getting stuck for a single second on any of the details, any of the complex concepts on there. Just the basics, top to bottom, skim them all. What skim reading means is that you read through the concepts, what the processes are, how they kind of work, figure it out as you go along. You look up words, you watch a few visual videos. You obviously won't know anything at this point, and that is completely fine. I personally get bored if I'm reading too much all of a sudden, so I like to mix up the chapters with the visual videos because it really helps clarify the basics very quickly. Basically, the videos are just easier to understand and much more fun to watch than just reading through a bunch of textbooks, and especially skim reading. They explain the topic in a simple and visual way with arrows, and they kind of give you ideas for what you can use to put on your mind map as well. Sometimes I look at these videos and I look at their diagrams and I see, oh, they showed the picture of the joint for all of these 3 diseases. Maybe, and that helps me come up with what I'm going to put on the mind map later on. And by the way, the final thing for this step is that while you skim read, think about the big subheadings that you can divide this chapter, all the information of this chapter up into. Most of the chapters can be divided up into 3 to 5 groups each. And remember, these subheadings of the chapters, I know there are already some in there. You don't need to use those exact ones. Those are the author's subheadings. You need to come up with your own way to divide the information of the chapter up. At times, there's no harm with using the author's framework, but just think about what is going to help you understand this chapter in the best way. What is the best way that you're going to be able to think about this chapter 10 days from now? Step 3, write down and group the key concepts and ideas into subheadings and their key phrases and keywords that you want to include on the mind map. Remember, all of this you're learning, but it's in preparation to make that mind map that links all these 3 topics together, that base that links them together. You should already have the subheadings or groups that you thought of from before, so add them on, and then under each subheading, add on the key concepts and the ideas or the words or the key phrases that you want to include on the mind map. I know this kind of resembles note-taking, but remember, this is just for the mind map. So make sure there's not too much useless information on there. When you're putting information in this list of keywords, of these categorized groups, etc., think about what you want to include in your mind map, because these groups are going on your mind map. Think about what is going to add to this mind map, or what is going to help link the other topics together. Because if this information doesn't help the mind map, help your basic understanding, then it's just a useless piece of information on the corner of your page. What I really want you to understand is that the process of grouping this information, figuring it out, okay, how do I want to categorize all this information into subheadings and keywords, etc. What's important to include? What should I not include? All of it. Number 1, promotes understanding. And number 2, when you're revising later, it's way easier to think of this information if it's categorized. Like, yeah, I'm just reading about this antibody test and it's just a test, fine, it helps. No, when you're reading this antibody test, you will think, okay, this antibody test is a first-line investigation, yeah, to treat what? To treat rheumatoid arthritis. And what is rheumatoid arthritis? It is a autoimmune disorder that affects the joints. That link happens very quickly in your head when you're categorizing information, especially when you're reading it. So focus on categorizing it as you're reading it, instead of just letting the information be and going like, yeah, I guess I know that now. Now, before we jump into the next part of the video where the mind mapping process really takes off, a tool that has recently cut my studying time down to half is Remnote, the kind sponsor of today's video. I get it, when there's a crap ton of notes, huge lectures, who's gonna actually be bothered to create questions and then actively recall them and study them properly? There's literally no time. But picture this, what if you had a tool that turned all of your notes automatically into flashcards as you were typing them out, so that you could review them as you were studying? Well, that's exactly what Remnote does. All you have to do is take your notes like usual, and Remnote works as magic. With just a quick double equal to sign between the question and the answer, you can create flashcards right inside of your notes. It's literally like Notion and Anki had a baby. This has sped up my process of creating recall questions a lot because I just started to do it on here. And as you saw, I also was creating these questions while I was preparing for the mind map, while I was making the notes for it. On top of that, it generates AI answers as you write out those questions, so no time is wasted there. It has image occlusion, PDF annotations, a bunch of other useful tools, but we'll save the deep dive for another time. For now, click the link in my description, remnote.com/Zain. That's it, remnote.com/ZAIN, and you will get your first month completely for free. So make sure to check it out, support this channel, and speed up your own learning process. Now let's get back to the mind mapping. Most of the questions I get asked about the priming and skimming stage is to do with one of the following things. Number 1, how do you speed up the skimming, and what do you actually do during it specifically? I'm gonna say this again. When I say skim read, yes, you go through all of the content, but you don't read every single sentence. You don't get hung up on specific information or things you don't understand. Right now, when you read something, you don't have to be like, oh, why am I not remembering this? Oh man, I should be able to understand this. Why don't I understand this? You are just trying to think about what the basics are. What are the concepts and processes involved here? What do they mean? What do they do? How are these 3 related diseases that I've chosen linked together? This skimming isn't all of your study. It is just to develop an initial structure in your head. And yes, with some topics, skimming is slow. It depends on your energy levels and your focus levels. It does take time. But that's fine. It's way better to do the priming of all of these chapters and grouping them together into the subheadings and organizing the information in a way that you will understand to create that bigger picture at this stage. That is what's important. And you're not wasting time. This is studying in one of the most important ways possible. You're layering the topic level by level, understanding fluidly, making sense of how things work. Number 2, skimming actually isn't enough for me to create a good mind map. What do I do? By the way, I just wanted to clear something up very quickly. While you're making that mind map, you should still have all of these resources up. You should be learning while you make it so that you can make better links and understand it more deeply. So this skimming that you're doing isn't really all of the reading that you'll get to do. You're reading more, you're understanding more, you're watching more videos, you're processing things throughout this entire process. But the difference between this process of creating the mind maps is that when you're reading critically. You're analyzing the structure of different topics. You're comparing the different chapters. Then you're evaluating if all of what you just learned actually even makes sense, if these groups even make sense. And eventually you'll be creating that mind map. And by the way, all of this is hitting those higher order levels of learning on the Bloom's taxonomy system. But yeah, that was just a bit of a ramble. I wanted to clear those misconceptions. Phase 2, the relating stage. Now is the part where we gotta come up with a way how all of these topics and concepts that we have organized are gonna be related on a single page on that mind map. What goes in the center, what goes around it. The next few steps that I'm gonna be talking about, I'm mainly very much actively thinking. Legit, I sit down and I plan what goes on the mind map. I compare the diseases more. I read it and watch a bit more to understand better. I really try hard to think about what is a good way to relate them. And this is a difficult process, but I'm gonna break it down. Let me explain properly. Step 4, find the one central idea that links all of these big topics together. Start with the center of the mind map. Rather than just having the big topics name in the middle, like, oh, bone diseases, have a drawing, a visual diagram that relates all the big topics together. And by the way, it relates all of these big topics on a very easy superficial level, so it shouldn't be hard to figure out. Think about what makes these topics similar but also different. Their causes, their effects, how they work, their parts, the list is endless. What visual thing in the middle can help us link everything else about these topics well? For me, to be honest, I always choose some diseases that are related together, so I can put related diseases on the mind map and compare them like that. It's not super hard for me to find some sort of central idea. For this especially, even though this is very obviously joint diseases, it took me like several minutes to figure out, okay, what am I gonna put in the middle? Is it gonna be the joint? Is it gonna be something else? You know what I mean? Another misconception I wanted to quickly touch on is that to come up with a central idea, you do not need to understand everything deeply. To come up with any of the relations, you don't need to understand everything super detailed. If you already know what the topics mean, if you've already grouped them into subheadings and concepts and it's well organized and you've compared them throughout, then it will be easy to come up with a central idea that links everything together on that mind map. The things I think about are, do they affect the same process or the same organ in a similar but different way? Are they caused by the same thing? Are they treated similarly? What is actually linking them? Just find the most basic link. And by the way, everything I've said so far, everything I will be saying applies to every conceptual and factual subject that is out there, as well as applies to maths, chemistry, and physics. I don't think I'll have enough time to explain how I create mind maps for physics or chemistry because I think that will take a bit more time. I'll dedicate a full video to that later on in this month. However, I think I might include some details on how to do it in the mind map PDF guide below. Again, linked in the video description. Check it out. And by the way, if you haven't subscribed so far, a lot of you watching are not subscribed. So please click the subscribe button, like the video, comment down below. Just help support the channel as a whole. Anyways, back to the step of finding that central idea on your mind map. I'll give a few examples of the mind maps that I've included on this channel. For rheumatoid, osteo, septic, reactive isn't on there, but for those 3 types of arthritis, I put a joint in the middle. Half of it is for osteo when it's kind of worn down. Half of it is super inflamed for septic and rheumatoid that are like infection and autoimmune related disorders. Here, I chose to relate these diseases based on their effect on the joint, and then I built around that. Another one is that Cushing's, Cons, Addison example that I showed. I think I based the central idea on the mind map around the causes of all three of them, and that is how I split their different types up. For the types of shock that I included in my very first mind map on this channel, I split them up in the types of ways that they affect the circulatory system. And that is the big benefit. By thinking of a good central idea of the mind map, by taking time to do that, even a couple extra minutes to do that, number one, I'll be able to link everything, all the concepts around a lot more easier. And number two, when I revise, for example, these arthritis diseases again, I'll be able to work from this memorable central diagram and work out to each and every concept on my mind map a lot easier, all of it in my head when I'm studying way later. Step 5, forming relations and connecting the concepts around the center. Once you've done the central idea, now you can start to think about finding relations between the rest of the concepts. How do we work that out? This is where we decide how to structure the rest of the information that we've noted down in all of our keywords, all the concepts that we want to include. How do we want to structure it on our mind map? By far, I think this is the thing that trips up most people the most, and this is the thing that takes the longest skill to develop. I'm still working on it myself. The amount you include, what specifically you include, how you connect and link things together, it doesn't come naturally. It is difficult to come up with the relations and force your brain to analyze all of this content. It's difficult learning, but it is essential for your long-term learning. The only way we learn and remember things is if they're linked together, remember? So first, think about how the big groups and the subheadings that you've divided each of the chapters into, how can they be related cross-chapter? How can they be related to each other and across chapters? Remember, for every topic, relations are just how two pieces of information are affecting each other. The subheadings or groups in your chapters could have the same effect on something, could have a different effect, have the same cause, be step 1, step 2, and step 3 in a chronological process. Write down all of the relations that you can come up with. From my experience, especially for beginners, that is the best way to do it. Otherwise, we just get confused, jump the gun, and start drawing everything on the mind map, start randomly writing the keywords down, making random arrows and connections that make no sense. Here, let me show you what I noted down for the bone diseases. Literally, I titled it Relations and then wrote down both affect the hands in different ways. Their treatments are almost the opposite of each other. I know that I wanted to remember what the x-rays in the joints were showing, so I made a note that I would label them in the middle of the diagram. Again, I'm relating these different things across the topics. I did the same again with gout and septic arthritis too, until I realized I don't even want to include gout or on this mind map because it'd be too much. Overall, understand that finding these actually takes a while and some extra reading and thinking. Remember, the process of making this mind map is the real learning. It's not really about the end product. And lastly, once you have all of these written down, now obviously choose what's important, what do you want to include on your mind map, how do you want to structure it, and what do you think is the best way to visually organize it. This, as I said, honestly depends on what your exams are and what you need to know for them. For me, including the entire pathophysiology, every molecule involved in causing these conditions is a waste of time. I'm not assessed on those things. I only want to emphasize the clinical process that the patient has to go through on my mind map and compare those between different diseases so that when a patient comes to me, I can see what they have. I can actually diagnose them. So that's the majority of what I include on my mind map. I mirrored the patient process of the osteoarthritis patient and the rheumatoid arthritis patient. I drew them out and then I mirrored their process as they went along, and I side by side linked them together as well. Through this mind map, I can compare what they look like. I can compare it and link their hands together. I've linked what their hands would be looking like. Because again, it is a common exam question, and I know I have not done it the best way. This is literally just processes for each of the diseases. I know I probably could have linked it in a more intuitive way. And again, these are skills that I will develop as well. I will learn to relate things better over time as well. I know to create the mind map, it takes a bit of thinking and preparation. But that's basically it. Once you've planned out the central idea, once you know how you're gonna structure the rest of the stuff around it, now is the time when we actually get to make it. This was a longer step, to be honest, because the majority of the comments that I got were to do with struggling with finding the relations, struggling to make that central idea, and what to actually put on the mind map. I've answered most of the questions already, except for one, I think. Someone said, thinking about organizing it and grouping everything together feels passive and takes too long. Please, I want to clarify. You've been learning throughout all of this. You've used pretty much all of the stages or the steps of the Bloom's taxonomy. If you are learning the topics in such an effective way, saving so much time because you're learning it this effectively that you barely ever have to go back and relearn anything, then is that not worth it? Is the preparation for the mind map not worth it? Anyways, phase 3, organizing stage. Now is actually when we make the mind map and organize all the subheadings and concepts that we have on one page. Create that one central idea, then create the relations around it, and actually create this base that links all of these topics so that we can use to remember for a very long time. Step 6, translate it all to a visual structure. So when first drawing it out, start with the central idea and then draw the main topics around it. Make the central diagram clear, use colors, and make sure that you use that central diagram to differentiate between the big topics. Add memorable icons next to each big topic so that you can use them to remember. Underline, draw a box, highlight the arrows to represent and put emphasis that these are big topics. Then you plan visually where each of the main concepts within each of the big topics will go, and then start adding them around it. I know it sounds simple and it looks simple when I show my mind map to you as the finished product, but actually planning it visually, thinking about where things can go on the mind map. For me, I was thinking about where these hands and like this diagram specifically is not related to anything. Where would it go on the mind map? How would it make sense? I did a very simple way of doing it where I split the diseases up like in half. Usually I might not do this. Usually I might have a more integrated approach. Again, it depends. The two key factors that I'm thinking about are clarity and flow. Here are my general tips for achieving good flow and making sure that the mind map is as clear as possible to make it as memorable as possible. Number 1, make it 90% visual and reduce the words on there as much as possible. Instead of me writing out what each of these diseases is affecting, every single symptom and the way everyone looks in the presentation and all the signs that they come with, there's just a huge list of things that I need to know for each disease. What I did instead was I drew these horrible looking stick diagrams to represent what the patient is presenting it with, what symptoms they have. And they're much more memorable as well. They represent the conditions. This one having issues with only joints, this one having issues with pretty much everything because it's an autoimmune disease. But I want you to notice that 20 or so facts here, 10 each symptoms, at least there's way more than that actually, were condensed into 2 simple, memorable diagrams that I can now also think and compare in my head because these 2 diseases are very easy to confuse and good to compare. And that is what you need to be doing with your specific topics as well. Use bright colors, use icons, use symbols, make them as visual and memorable as possible. The facts can't be a list of facts, might as well have just made notes. And yes, this applies to every subject. You can always find a visual way to represent facts, concepts, processes. Actually, it may even help with physics or chemistry more so because you want to represent these equations, these big topics in visual ways. You want to make sure that you understand these topics so well that there's a clear flow of ideas. And yes, to maintain extreme levels of flow and clarity within these mind maps, let's do these things. Add thicker arrows for more important connections, and also add different types of arrows for different types of connections. You can see I could have done this much better, of course, but I've done thicker arrows for the main big topics. I've done darker arrows here to show the process that the patients are going through, starting right from when they present with the disease, what they look like, and then smaller arrows coming off showing and labeling the specific diagrams on there, and also linking different concepts together. Next, a very important thing that took me a while to realize and actually properly implement is to make each group on the mind map as intuitive and easy to understand as possible. The way the subtopics and concepts are laid out on the mind map needs to make visual sense. You need to be able to close your eyes and picture it almost perfectly. And then if you can't do that, if you can't actually remember and visualize this mind map, then you haven't made it as easy to understand as possible. It isn't intuitive. You need to reorganize and find clearer relationships between the concepts. Anyways, finishing off, step 7, learn while creating the mind map. This isn't a separate step, but throughout this entire process, I'm thinking about these topics like a Lego set. You got a whole bag of Lego, you need to now group up the pieces and link which ones go together. But while I put it together, I'm going back to the instruction manual. I'm going back to the textbook, the key phrases, the words, the videos, looking up ways to visualize something better. Honestly, I'm not a very creative person. Half the ideas of how I visualize certain things on this mind map, including the picture of that joint, including several icons on there, have come from visual videos like Osmosis or Zero to Finals. But that's also what active learning looks like. I'm using the resources to solidify and affirm how every single thing on this mind map is working, or I'm fixing it. Have I missed something? Is something not connecting in the way it should be? If so, move back through the steps. Let's do it again. Taking a step back. Does it make sense? Can I now use it to remember the rest of the topic a lot more effectively? When I'm reading something, when I look through details, can I picture this mind map and then fit these details on there? As I draw this mind map out, I'm continuously evaluating how good it is and how usable it is. And that is what makes this method so effective. You're continuously challenging your brain and the way you've learned things and the way you think about things again and again. In comparison, isn't that so much better than you just reading off the textbook and then trying to memorize and make notes or converting it into flashcards that you're not really understanding, are you? This is like the epitome of understanding something super well. And that's pretty much it. That is all I have to say about the main steps of the mind mapping pro method. I'm going to include more of the details and the specific questions that people have asked in that mind map PDF guide. It would be too long to answer every single one. I have now heavily bought into this idea that if one can learn how to create these mind maps, they will be set for their education in ways that are unmatchable. And that is why I think I'm gonna make a lot more of these mind map videos. Let me know if that sounds good to you guys. Oh, and also comment down below if you have any topics or specific subjects that you want me to make mind maps for, and give me the information for them as well. For example, where am I gonna find the content for those specific topics? I wanna show you guys that it is very doable for different subjects, and I wanna give you the steps for them as well. But yeah, let me know. Please do subscribe if you haven't already. The majority of you are not subscribed. Subscribe, support the channel, like this video. Let me know if there's anything else, any specific issues to do with the mind maps. Keep commenting them down below and I'll try my best to keep addressing them, keep updating that mind map PDF guide. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.